The recording should start, and there it is. So I'll go ahead and get us started here. Could you please go ahead and mute yourself? Thank you. There we go. All right, so I'm not sure how I came up with this title. Maybe I was trying to talk some census into myself. I've made so many bad census jokes, so I apologize if they come out here. But this is pretty much on the history of the federal census, as well as a little bit about kind of how the census works and why it's important and how genealogists can use it in their research. And you can't really see it, but we all in the Georgia room have shirts that say, eventually all genealogists come to their census. And it's just kind of, we use the census a lot with our research and when we're helping others with their research. So we thought it was pretty cute. We'll probably be wearing them around the library in the future. So before we get too deep into the census, I do want to share a little bit of library news. Currently, we have 7 branches open for limited service, and I really should change that to 6 because Sewell Mill is currently curbside only, and it's 11 to 2 every day, Monday through Friday. With additional branches are now open for curbside as well, and that includes Powder Springs, Stratton, and Sibley. So you can still use East Cobb, Mountain View, North Cobb, South Cobb, Bindings, and West Cobb. You can go inside to check out books and use the computer that way. We do still have limited services in place, so we do not have study rooms available. We do not have any programs happening on site, so story time is still virtual, as well as all of our Georgia Room programs. So patrons visiting the library will be asked to do a temperature check upon entry, and that's just kind of to make sure everybody's all right. And if it's really hot outside, we do have a place where you can sit down and cool off before you get a second temperature. And also, masks are not required to enter. We just encourage it, and all of the staff are wearing masks at this time. So, and at this point, programs will likely remain virtual through the end of the year. Just keep an eye out for any news that may change. And I did want to share a few pictures for the Georgia Room. This is what the new entrance is going to look like. We're overlooking the federal cemetery. And then this will be our new our new conference room, I should say. And we may end up doing some of our programming in this room as well. But it's larger than our last one, and it's certainly brighter for sure. So this is actually the back of the Georgia Room. And you can see where we have shelving attached to the walls, and that back door is going to be exit only, but it's a much shorter walk to the restroom. If you have been to the old Georgia Room, it was a little bit of a walk across the whole building, but this one it will cut that time at least in half. We're hoping. And so this is the full length of the Georgia Room. You can see most of our shelving is now in the middle. So if you may have heard before I started recording, we will be mapping out where everything goes next week. So we're hoping that we can start unpacking soon. But we can't really unpack until we know where it's going. So we will have a lot more natural lighting and larger windows. So we definitely still have one of the greatest views. And then they actually started moving all of our boxes into the new Georgia Room. So we'll be reorganizing and mapping out where everything's going before we start unpacking. But as you can see here, we have a lot of other states. We have some family histories there. And then we have a lot of our microfilm ready to go back to. So just to get started, I do want to start on the history of the federal census, but I won't drag on too long. So to keep in mind, much of the information used here is based on data, not personal information. So if it is, especially if it comes after 1940, a lot of it, the personal information is unavailable based on the 72-year rule, which was set upon the average lifespan of an individual. So the 72-year rule went into effect in 1978, and it was just a continuation of the agreement between the Census Bureau and the National Archives. Records from 1950 to 2010 can only be obtained by the person named in the census or their next of kin after submitting a certain form. And not even federal agencies have the power to break this rule. So all personal information is highly protected by the Census Bureau until 72 years is up. So in 2020, we have the most recent census data is 1940, but in 2 years, it's estimated for April 2nd, which is the beginning of April is usually Census Day. It has been June in the past, but right now it's looking like it's April, hopefully. The 1950 census data will be released. So this was a little bit of trivia that I found out, and I just found it so interesting, so I want to include it. So in order to be able to communicate with the American public through fireside chats, President Roosevelt wanted to know the effectiveness of having fireside chats. So before they could put this into action and start planning and spending and coordinating it, they had the 1930 census ask, "Do you own a radio?" And this was asked to every home that was received a questionnaire or received a visit from the marshal. So because 40.3% of all families responded positively, they were able to use the fireside chats to effectively communicate with current events between the president and the American family at home. And that is, I don't know if you can really see it. This is just an abstract of what their results were. But over 12 million families stated that they had a radio in the home, and that number increased as the fireside chats became more popular. So the first census officially began in 1790, and it is stated in the Constitution, and it was first coordinated under Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson. And other territories had their own census data, but federal marshals took down information and collected it as an official collection point of 1790. So carrying out the census was quite difficult in a new country with little infrastructure and a widely scattered population. However, uniform census data did not exist until 1830, so marshals collected their own data, and they would ask whatever they felt was relevant to the collection. And that usually did include the family's name, the surname, how many people were in the household, etc. But you can also go online and check with the Census Bureau to see exactly how many different addendums is relevant to the collection. So the areas covered included were the 13 original states, as well as Kentucky, Maine, Vermont, and the Southwest Territory, which is in Tennessee. So the information included was the name of the head of household and persons by the following descriptions. Free white males of 16 years and upward, really to assess the industrial and military potential. Free white males under 16 years. Free white females, no age difference, just if you were female and white, that you were just counted as one. All other free persons by sex and color, and then slaves as well. So this is just a brief overview of different census data collected, and it does vary quite a bit by decade. So this is the easiest way uh, that I have ever seen census data organized. You will not see this in later decades, but this is basically all the uniform data that was collected between 1719 and 1830. Now, if you notice, there are some with little tick marks, and that was really just to count free white persons only. And after 1860, and after the end of the Civil War, that free or slave mark was completely eradicated. So between 1840 and 1890, you see that there is quite a little bit more information collected. The fugitive and manumitted slaves for 1850 and 1860, those were only asked to the people, to the slave owners, whether or not any of their slaves were fugitives or manumitted, or but also asked were physical and mental handicaps, which was later changed to disabled, literacy, birthplace, parents' birthplace, citizenship, naturalizations, industry or occupation, a veteran status, and that was really just randomly included with different census data. It wasn't really consistent. It was usually asked every 20 or 30 years. If you were unemployed, your duration of unemployment, and the value of your real estate. Now, if you recognize 1890 as being an interesting census for the country, I should warn you, you don't have to look. That is a picture of damaged records. In 1921, the Commerce Building, the Commerce Department building, they experienced a fire in the basement, which was where census data was being stored at the time. And most of the 1890 census was badly damaged by that fire, and they were the only and original copies of that data. So most of the 1890 census data is lost. There are specific regions that did survive. It's very, very small, and you can also check this out on the National Archives. But of Georgia, only Muskogee County, where Columbus, Georgia is, only those records survived, and there's very specific counties that did survive and they were able to save. So this was considered an archivist's nightmare, and they were not aware of any disaster planning and recovery at the time, but this definitely pushed for the creation of a National Archives to further protect any future records that were at risk. They don't know what the cause was. They did investigate it quite heavily. Some said there may be cigarettes, and a lot of the employees were asked about it, even though they were not smoking in the building. Others said there may have been spontaneous combustion. There was an Ohio woman that believed it was a conspiracy to defraud her family of an estate because those records were destroyed. They also looked at electrical wires, but those were all intact. So really, they could not reach any conclusive cause to what started the fire. And it burned anywhere from 30 minutes, which was the last time somebody was near the basement, but they saw no smoke, 2 hours. So between 30 minutes and maybe hours, because the fire was so difficult to put out. So in the 1790 to 1820 and 1850 to 1870 census data, they were all stored on a different floor, and volumes from 1830, 1840, 1880, 1900, and 1910 were also damaged, but not by fire. They were damaged from the water used to fight the fire. And the number of volumes damaged from the water damage is approximately 8,900. And of that, almost 8,000 were just from 1910 alone. But they were able to be dried and copied. And if there are any missing data, you can usually find it in an addendum or on the state level. So out of the 1890 federal census data of millions of Americans counted and questioned and added to the census, only 6,000 names survived. So these are all somebody's ancestors, and just because you can't find something from 1890 does not mean they did not respond. It just means it was likely destroyed by the fire. But this did lead to the creation of the National Archives, really supported by the National Genealogical Society and the National Society for the Daughters of the American Revolution. All right. So with the 20th century census, you see a lot more immigration questions, such as birthplace and if you were born outside the U.S. And this was because this was really during the first big waves of immigration from Europe, especially during the World Wars. If you were English speaking or you spoke other languages, your occupation and industry, your veteran status, and they also included Native Americans, including their tribal affiliation and what percentage Indian they were, either full or mixed. And then if you were in private or government work, and this was asked in 1940, and if you were in public emergency work, like out of World War II. So I have President Herbert Hoover pictured because after the stocks crashed in 1929 to 1930, a special census was called to reach the unemployment numbers. And the numbers that came out with the 1930 census were criticized for being so low, so they had marshals go back out and double check and see how extreme the unemployment was in the country. So January of 1931, the data it produced confirmed that the severity of unemployment in the country, and that's how they knew how serious the stock market crash was. So for 1950, even though this data is not released yet, it will. We are expecting it in 2 years, hopefully, and we'll learn a lot more about what was asked and what information we can gain from it. But it will include the territories of Alaska, Hawaii, and the continental U.S., American Samoa, the Canal Zone in Panama, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, and some of the smaller island territories. So we'll have a larger pool of census data to use. So I don't know if you can tell, but I'm quite excited. So with census data, there are many uses, not just for genealogy. Businesses use it to understand what kind of quality and quantity of stock they should have for their services and business. The government uses it for representative districts and to figure out if they need to do any redistricting, or if they need to address any issues with representation in that area as well. And you can see this is only half of a leaflet they have for the Census Bureau, which includes community initiatives. You have local governments, real estate developers. So, and this is just put out by the 2020 census. I'm sure there'll be more information coming out once they actually complete collecting the census data for 2020. But it's not just for genealogy, it affects your community now, not just in the future. So with Census Technology, I might go a little fast because there is quite a bit of information here. But if you get confused, just let me know in the chat. So Hollerith tabulators and sorters. These were versions used to with census data from 1890 until computers replaced it. And it was able to read punch cards and collect the data and use statistics that way. Now, before 1890 and with 1900 census data, this was all done by hand, and it would take approximately 8 years. Sometimes it took less, but it would take quite a few years to collect that data just in time for the next census. This is Recordac Microfilm. These are employees actually using the microfilm machines to photograph over 76 million records of the 1900 census. And this is the early days of archiving and preserving the census data. And this allowed a lot of things, census data, to be digitized later down the line. So you can easily search for surnames. You can search by states and regions because they were able to preserve it on microfilm at this time. So this is the Univac. This was the first computer, and it was really pushed forward by the Census Bureau. So it was specifically made just for census data. And this was allowing data input to using magnetic computer tape. And then it was tabulated using vacuum tubes and state-of-the-art circuits that either printed out or stored on more magnetic tape. And it was used throughout the 1950s. Univac also played a key role in several monthly economic surveys. And the computer excelled at working with repetitive but intricate mathematics involving weighting and sampling of the surveys. And as it was the first successful civilian computer, it was a key part of the dawn of the computer age as well. Despite early delays, the Univac program at the Census Bureau was a great success, to the point they requested a second Univac be made as well to help with more data. So FOSDIC, which is the film optical sensing device for input to computers, it was first used to process the 1960 census, and the enumerators transferred data collected from questionnaires. So these are still the paper questionnaires, to a FOSDIC readable schedule on which they were recorded as penciled and circled. If you're familiar with Scantron, it's a little bit similar as well. They just go through and scan it and collect that in statistical data. So the Census Bureau used updated versions of FOSDIC for 1970, 1980, and 1990 census, and it proved so successful it was not replaced until the introduction of optical character recognition for the census in 2000. So with Diamond Tiger, it's actually the foundations for modern geographical information systems. This was mainly used for topographical data and understanding what the landscape looked like and if anything was changing within the landscape as well. So I'm not going to read the full names of them, but Dime was created first, and then Tiger was improved upon and used, and it's still used today as well. So with modern data collection, you can see that we have used CD-ROMs for with the data. You have internet to you. You used to be able to request the questionnaires. Now with the 2020 census, you can actually do the full census questionnaire online. So with the 1960 census, the Census Bureau also mailed out questionnaires. And they also implemented a mail-back enumeration for households in larger metropolitan areas, which was approximately 60% of the U.S. So you can still use the mail-in, mail-back way of doing your census questionnaire today. You can also do it by telephone. And there was quite a large push for community engagement. So as you see, like with the libraries, we're assisting with people doing their census. There's also churches and charities and other firms that are really helping out with getting people to learn about the census and understand that we are asking everyone to fill it out. And this was really the community engagement was hoping to gather in poorer populations who may not have the resources to do the census themselves, but they can still find their resources through one of these intermediaries. So as I briefly stated before, this is the first time that the census can be done online, and it, depending on how successful it is, we won't really know until, I would say, early next year. They may keep it for the 2030 census. I almost forgot what year it was. So depending on how accessible the online questionnaire remains and how successful it is at retaining that information, you may see the online questionnaire in the future as well. So with Census Outreach, I briefly touched on this before, but I did want to let you know that Ancestor Appreciation Day is coming up on September 27th, and this is put out by the Census Bureau, and it happens every year, and it just encourages people to talk about their genealogy, their family histories, to share old photographs, and it's just a way to show how the census is still important in everyday households. You can also use Census Resources provided by NARA, and NARA is the National Archives and Records Administration. I tend to shorten it to National Archives or just NARA. And you can actually use these drop-down menus here and see where you can access information and the data from the census records, and if there's other resources you can look at, advice for how to use those records for your own research. And it also includes any relevant stories, any articles, or any supplemental material you might need for each census. So when you're doing your genealogy research with the census, you want to begin with the most current census and work your way backwards. You want to look to NARA for hints and directions, and you always want to remember the 72-year rule. And I do want to advise you that if you can't find something one year, but you do find it in other years, it may just be they didn't respond to that questionnaire. They may have chosen not to respond, or there may be missing information from that time. So it's not that they didn't exist. We have had requests where we just could not determine where somebody was, but we know they existed. It just means that that information is currently unavailable, and it may be a miracle and it shows up later in the future, but for at that moment, it may just not exist. So this is a lot of information here, but there's one of the things I attached as a handout is the fact finder, and this is looking for individuals within the census. So this pretty much narrows down if you're looking for a date of birth. You can see that the 1900 census includes the month, and the 1910 through 1940 census includes age, and the 1870 includes the month if they're less than a year old. With the birthplace, 1850 through 1940 indicate either state or county, either state or the county and the state. And with marriage date, 1900 to 1910, a census includes the number of years married. So it's just different information. If you're looking for, like for example, if you're looking at military service, the 1930 census will indicate if they're a Civil War veteran. And the 1930 census also lists service in other major wars, such as World War I, Spanish-American War, things like that. So it's a very interesting handout, and I can give you just a moment to look at the graphics that I updated to make it look prettier. But it does have quite a bit of information, and I was blown away when I found this, because this is a huge help for when you're trying to determine if you see information from one census but not the next one. And I can also come back to this later. Just to jump here, it's the New York City Department of Records and Information Services. This was actually suggested to me by a coworker. They have digitized over 1.6 million photographs, and it allows researchers to find historic locations from New York historical and genealogical searches. So if you're, for example, if you find records of your family living in Brooklyn, like maybe 50 years ago, you can actually find that address through this collection and see what that address was all that time ago. So this used to be a paid-for service, and they just made it available for free. I highly suggest you check it out. It's really interesting. There's so much information there, and I just had to include it, especially if you are doing census records research. So if you just look for the New York City Department of Records and Information Services, or if you just look for the NYC Municipal Archives Collections, it's the first thing that pops up. And I also want to remind you to fill out the 2020 census. You can just go to census.gov to get started. You can also go to one of those 6 libraries that I mentioned at the beginning. They have census computers set up, and they can help you access the questionnaires if you want to do it online. You can also just communicate with one of the local firms or the census marshals. They are still around. They are still collecting data until the end of October, so by Halloween. And there's still a lot that we are doing with the census, so don't forget to fill out your 2020 census, and we hope to see you once we reopen. Now, does anyone have any questions or concerns?
I noticed that you're recording this. Where do we go to get the copies of the recordings to rewatch?
Oh. The recording, once I finish with the program, I'm going to send it to our community outreach. I can't remember her exact title. I'm sorry, Shannon. But she uploads it to the Cobb Library YouTube, and then you can access it through YouTube that way.
Okay, so past sessions are up there too?
Yes, the past 3 programs we've done.
Cobb Library YouTube.
And it's just the Cobb, I think it's just Cobb County Library. I think you've just searched that in YouTube, it should show up.
Cool. This was really neat.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry I was late.
No, it's all right. I improve upon it each time.
Would you have run it if I hadn't shown up? Because it looks like I'm the only one here.
Yes, I tend to, even if people show up late, I tend to just run it, and I'll upload the recording, and people can also ask questions and email us later.
Okay, cool. Because I know there's some in the past that I haven't been able to get to that I would like to review. So.
Yeah, and you can always reach out and ask us about any of those programs. I believe we still have all of the handouts and PowerPoints, and we can also just do a quick run through of an outline too.
Okay, I'll have to see if I kept a list of the ones that I wanted.
Okay.
But so I'm not originally from Georgia, and I don't think any of my ancestors are from Georgia. Would I be able to use the Georgia room to do
Yes.
my ancestry work, or?
Yes. Once we reopen, which will hopefully be soon, we were closed for renovations, but we started moving. They started moving our boxes back in. We just have to figure out where we're putting everything once we get back. But once we reopen, you will be allowed to come in. We do have research. We have collections for at least 30 other states, and we also have open access to Ancestry and Family Search.
Oh, you have open access, so I wouldn't have to get a membership.
No. Now to use it from home, you will.
Right.
But if you come into the Georgia room, you can just use a researcher card and log in that way.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Okay.
Now it is Ancestry is currently available from home through the library. You will need a library card though.
I can just use my library card?
Yes, you can access Ancestry if you just go to the Georgia Room page. You'll be prompted to log in with your library card and your PIN, and then you can just use the library subscription of Ancestry from home. They haven't told us an end date yet, so right now it is still available.
Okay, so that's just from home, but it'll be always available at the Georgia room computers.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they opened it up from home with everything going on.
Oh, so that makes sense. Yeah.
So you can access their full collection from home. You just can't use it in conjunction with an Ancestry account.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay.
If there are no other questions, I can also leave you here with these are both of our email addresses. Mine is the second one. The first one goes to all four of us in the Georgia room, and you can also use the contact form on the Georgia room page as well.
Okay. .org. And you're Kathleen? Okay.
Yeah.
She really is the best.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, if we're a little quiet next week, it just means we're doing a lot of physical labor with all the boxes.
Yeah. Is there a plan for next week? Is this a weekly thing or?
No. With the programming, I was doing it every other week. I did have to slow down as renovations came to a close. I haven't decided when the next one will be, but it will be on a Thursday at 1 p.m.
Okay.
My estimate is maybe the 17th.
Okay.
Of September 17th. You can also check on the Georgia Room page.
Okay.
So once I have it scheduled, I ask Shannon to list it there.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Let's see.
Can she hear us? Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome. Let me see. And let me go ahead and include. That's the link to the YouTube page for the library.
Okay, Cobcat. Okay.
So they have all of the library videos, but we do have the Georgia Room ones there as well.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome.
Hopefully I get to participate in some more.
Yes. Hopefully we can have a lot more coming too.
Yeah.
Cool. Once we have more pictures, we'll be sharing those as well.
Okay.
So, thank you for coming.
Now, which library is the Georgia Room at? Is that the one downtown Marietta?
Yes, we're out of the Schweitzer Library, which is the central branch of the system.
Okay. Okay.
So the whole building is under renovations, so we are looking forward to having it reopen.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye. All right.
Thank you, Katie. It was good.
You're welcome.
Thumbs up.
Let me see. I'm going to turn off the recording.
Okay.